Chapter 2, Section 7. The last thing we're going to talk about in Chapter 2 is equations and inequalities involving absolute value. So remember that absolute value is the distance that a number is from 0. Therefore, if we have an equation that looks like this, the absolute value of some number is equal to 2. Basically what that's saying is, or what it's asking you is, what number is 2 units from 0? Or what numbers are 2 units from 0? Well, you know if you go to the number line that you have a 2 that's 2 units to the right of 0, and you have a negative 2 that's 2 units to the left of 0. So to solve an equation that involves absolute value, that's exactly what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to isolate the absolute value. So for this particular problem, look, the absolute value group is already by itself. But here we have a negative 6 over here with the absolute value group, so we need to take care of that first. That would be step number 1 in this particular problem. Over here we wouldn't have to worry about it. Once you have the absolute value group by itself, you're going to set the left side equal to both the positive and the negative. Alright, so step number 2, set the left side equal to both the positive and the negative of the right side, and the reason being is because of what we discussed here. So in this particular problem, again, we're going to have 3x minus 4 is equal to 14, but we're also going to have 3x minus 4 is equal to negative 14. Okay, step number 3. We're going to solve it, and it says all equations involving absolute value will be disjunctions. So set the left side equal to both the positive and the negative of the right side, and then we're going to actually solve. So here, we'll add 4 to both sides, and we'll have 3x is equal to 18, divide both sides by 3, and we're going to have x is equal to 18 thirds. On the right hand side, we would add 4 to both sides. And so we'll have 3x is equal to negative 10. Divide both sides by 3. And so you have x is equal to negative 10 thirds. I think this one's going to reduce on down to 6. So now, let's see why we have 2 answers. And you don't have to do this with every problem. I'm just going to show you why we have 2 answers. If I take 6 and plug it in here, I've got to get 14, okay? So 3 times 6 is 18, and 18 minus 4 is going to be 14, and then the absolute value of 14 is 14. So 6 does work. Let's try negative 10 thirds, and I'll write that one out for you. If we do the absolute value of 3 times negative 10 thirds minus 4, and we want to know, does that equal 14? Well, the 3's are canceling out, and so we'll get negative 10 minus 4. And then we have the absolute value of negative 14, which you know is 14. And so that's why you need 2 answers. When you have an absolute value problem, most of the time you will get 2 answers. So just don't forget, when you set these problems up, you've got to set it up to where it's equal to the number that you see and the opposite of that number on the right hand side. Now let's go back to this problem. Here we've got to get that absolute value by itself, so we're going to add 6 to both sides. And so we'll have the absolute value of x plus 2 is equal to 4. Now from here, separate it out, so we'll have x plus 2 is equal to 4, and x plus 2 is equal to negative 4. Alright, so we'll minus 2 from both sides, and we'll get x is equal to 2. And if we minus 2 from here, we're going to get x is equal to negative 6. And again, you can check your work and make sure you've got it right. So just don't forget, if that absolute value is not by itself, get it by itself, going through the math. Once you have the absolute value group by itself, take it and set it equal to both the positive and the negative, and then work it out. Please remember, absolute value problems will have 2 answers. The only time that's not true is if you have a 0 out here. Alright, to solve an inequality that involves absolute value. So now we're going from equations to inequalities. So again, going through the steps, the first thing you're going to do is isolate the absolute value. Then you're going to write the inequality exactly as it is and solve. Then you're going to write the inequality with a reversed symbol and opposite sign and solve. So we're going to talk about two different inequalities because depending on which inequality symbol you have depends on what kind of answer you're going to get. So to solve and graph the absolute value is less than 2. Basically what this is saying is what numbers are less than 2 units from 0. So if we're on a number line and we know we have those numbers. What numbers are less than 2 units from 0? Well, it's going to go from -2 and 2 and all those numbers in between. So it would be -1, 0, and 1. So this means the number x must be less than 2 units away from 0. So therefore, x is greater than -2 and x is less than 2. And then I've already graphed it for you. So all less than inequalities are going to be conjunctions. You can't see that because of this, but all less than inequalities that involve absolute value will be conjunctions. They will converge. Alright, so what happens if it's greater than? Well, basically this is saying that the number x must be greater than 1 unit away from 0. So if we have 0 and we have our 1s, we're looking for numbers greater than. So you can see greater than is going to give you a disjunction. So let's look at this. Solve and graph, and we are going to write it in interval notation as well. So this particular problem right here, the absolute value group is by itself, so we're just ready to set it up. X plus 1 is less than 8, and x plus 1 is greater than -8. So you see what I did? I write it just like I see it. And then I have to turn the inequality around and make it opposite. So it's kind of like the equations, except now we've got to turn that inequality around as well. So if we take this and we solve, we'll minus 1 from both sides. And we're going to have x is less than 7. And then if I minus 1 from here, I'm going to have x is greater than -9. So this symbol is a less than symbol. So if you have a less than symbol, we're thinking it's going to be a conjunction. So let's try it. So you have -9 and 7. So the one on the left says x has to be less than 7. So far so good. The one on the right says that x has to be greater than -9, and you can see we do get our conjunction. So our interval notation is going to be from -9 to 7. So it does kind of help you to remember if you have a less than, it's going to be a conjunction. If you have a greater than, it's going to be a disjunction. So this one here, for example, should be a disjunction. Let's try. First thing we need to do is we need to get the absolute value group by itself. So let's get rid of that 3. So we're going to have the absolute value of x plus 7 is greater than or equal to 7. Now let's separate it out. X plus 7 is greater than or equal to 7. Write it just how you see it. And then turn the inequality around and make the sign different. So let's solve. Here we're going to have minus 7. And so we'll have x is greater than or equal to 0. And here if we minus 7, we're going to have x is less than or equal to -14. So let's look at what the graph is going to look like. We have 0 and -14. The one on the left says x has to be greater than or equal to 0. Greater than or equal to is going to be a bracket going to the positive infinity. The one on the right says that x has to be less than or equal to -14, so it's going to be a bracket going less than. And then for our interval notation, again, remember you read your graph from left to right. So we're going to go from negative infinity to -14, and we're going to include it with a bracket, union, cup, however you want to say it, from 0 all the way to positive infinity. And there you have it. Now, some things that we need to talk about. These are just things that are kind of tricky, and you will see some of these on your test, so to just be aware. The first one is this. All equations that take on the form absolute value equal to 0, well, you just have to remember that absolute value equal to 0 has a solution of x is equal to 3 because the number x plus 3 has to be 0. For example, there's only one number that I can plug in here that's going to make this 0, and that number is a negative 3. And the reason being is because remember, if you solve these, if you solve an absolute value equation, you have to take the positive and the negative of the number on the right. Well, 0 is neutral. It's neither positive or negative. So you can't set up two separate problems. So this is the only case. This is the only case when you have absolute value that you're only going to get one answer, and that's if it's set equal to 0. Now, this one, we have to understand what absolute value means. Remember, absolute value, anytime you take the absolute value of a number, you're going to get a positive answer. Well, this is asking you what number is going to give you a negative 3 after you take the absolute value. Nothing. You cannot get an absolute value of negative 3 because when you take the absolute value, it's going to change it to positive 3. So this answer is no solution. You don't even have to work the problem out. When you see a negative number on the opposite side of an absolute value, just know it's no solution. This one, absolute value less than negative 4. Well, think about all the numbers less than negative 4. They're all negatives, and we just said when you take the absolute value of a number, you can never get a negative. So that's no solution as well. This one, absolute value greater than negative 1, so think about all the numbers greater than negative 1. You have 0, 1, 2, 3, basically all the positive numbers. Well, anytime you take absolute value of a number, you're going to get positive numbers. So this will always happen. Always happen. So your answer is going to be all real numbers. Now, I will give you a word of advice. If you work these problems out, not this one, but the number 2, 3, and 4, if you work these problems out, you're going to get a definitive answer, and it is wrong. The correct answer is either no solution or all real numbers, depending on which situation you have, so be very careful with that. If you work these out, you will get a number, and that is wrong. So if you would, try these problems on page 110 and see if you can figure these out.